You had a lot of questions today, and I'm going to start with the obvious one. You had a lot of questions about what's going on with this so-called double tap strike on the small boat out of Venezuela, or apparently off the coast of Venezuela, off the coast of Venezuela on September 2nd. Let's go back just a step, and let me remind you that all of the strikes, I believe there are 19 of them now, with as many as 76 people dead, have been conducted by the Trump administration under conditions that most legal observers say are not legal. So what that means is that normally the way that the United States handles the stop drugs coming into the United States, although it's a little doubtful whether these were actually aimed at the United States because the small boats could not carry enough fuel to get to the United States. But the way normally those trafficking boats are stopped is that the Coast Guard and similar authorities usually shoot the motors, which is, I'm laughing a little bit because if you've grown up around those kind of motors, you know they're actually pretty delicate. And you shoot the motors don't go anymore. You board the boats and you take the people on them to the authorities in their countries. And that's always been the way that America has handled the stopping of the kind of drug traffickers that these allegedly are. But the Trump administration has decided instead simply to blow up those boats with the argument that the people on them are what they call narco-terrorists. And there's a bunch of things about that are funny before I get into the legality. The first of those is that one of the things you hear White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt do a lot is talk about the flooding of the United States with drugs, and then she transitions immediately into fentanyl and the huge numbers of deaths that the United States has had from fentanyl. But what is being trafficked from Venezuela is not fentanyl, it's largely cocaine. Fentanyl comes in a different way. So there's already a sleight of hand there. There's also the fact that the president has pardoned a number of major drug dealers, including one just yesterday, I think it was published today, who imported huge amounts of cocaine to the United States. But then there is also the legal issue, and the legal issue is that nobody has seen any evidence that these people are in fact drug traffickers. This is just the administration say so. And there is a real legal issue with just declaring a number of cartels to be at war with the United States. And, you can see this playing out in a number of ways with the fact that the administration has said it does not have to go to Congress for a declaration of war or for the continuation of its continuing strikes under the War Powers Act of 1973. But a lot of Congress people are like, hang on just a minute here. You're engaged, you're killing people, and you're doing it without any input from the United States Congress. So that was already a problem. Okay, so that was already an issue, and an issue that a lot of people think was illegal. However, there's something else that went on with this so-called double tap of September 2nd. And that is that after the initial strike appeared to leave, of the 11 people who were on the ship, it's not a ship really, it's a boat. Just so you know, you can put boats on ships, but not ships on boats. That's how you remember which is which. Boats are little, ships are big. And these are little boats. There were 11 people on that boat, and the first strike apparently left 2 men alive clinging to the wreckage. So then there was a second strike that killed those 2 people. And then as of this afternoon, just before I came over here, news that there were 2 additional strikes to remove the wreckage, to destroy the wreckage, to leave no trace of what had happened. And the issue with that is a huge one, because even by the standards that the administration itself has laid out, this idea that they can declare themselves judge and jury and executioner for these people on these boats, you can't kill people who are, first, and those are civilians, by the way, but you cannot kill people who are outside, who are no longer engaged in any way. That is, it's called being outside of combat. That is a war crime. And that is illegal. And it is, as Angus King, an independent of Maine, said yesterday, it is also murder. So the real question is, who gave the order? And I'm going to come back to that in just a second, but I would like to point out the story of war crimes and the story of the laws of war is a long one, and it's a really interesting one, and it's worth spending some time on. One of these days, I'm actually going to write a letter about it, because it's a weird thought, right? That during war, you're going to have rules. I mean, that seems like it's kind of crazy, but in fact, we get rules about war in the middle of the 19th century that begin actually here in the United States and in a few other countries, in part because of the dramatic change of what war means in the middle of the 19th century when you get the concept of artillery and rifled bullets. Because what that does is it opens up the concept of total war, and that involves a lot of non-combatants. So beginning with that concept, you start to get governments saying, what do we do? Like, can we kill everybody? Can we not kill everybody? Because they're concerned partly about morality, but they're also concerned about rebuilding. Like, what does it mean to be at war with the population? And so out of things like the American Civil War and out of other wars as well, you start to see the rise of codes that say, you can kill somebody during wartime, but you can't rape somebody during wartime. You can kill a soldier, but you can't kill somebody who surrenders. And so they come up with these ideas that have rules around them. And that's a really important concept because, first of all, it makes it possible for societies to reconcile after a war, but also because it protects non-combatants. So it's designed to protect non-combatants. So for the United States to go outside of those and do what certainly looks to observers like a war crime is a really big deal. Now let me go back again to somebody like Pete Hegseth and what he stands for and what he has done. Hegseth, if you recall, was briefly in the military himself and really made his career as somebody talking about getting rid of the woke military, and you got to stop tying our hands, and you've got to be able to, attack the enemy without your hands being tied. And he really kind of embodied this whole cowboy masculinity, the idea that rules were for somebody else. He wrote a book about it, and if you remember during his confirmation hearings, again, Angus King of Maine's why so in my mind. I watched a lot of Angus King yesterday. Angus King of Maine, who sits on both the Senate Intelligence Committee and the Senate Armed Services Committee, and is, clearly a very, very thoughtful senator, really pressed him again and again and again on his apparent disregard for the Geneva Conventions. And the Geneva Conventions are a series of those rules to protect non-combatants. And Hegseth refused to say he would support the Geneva Conventions. He's this guy who's, he's going to be out there killing people. So what happened is that last Friday, the day after Thanksgiving, a couple of Washington Post reporters, Ellen Nakashima and Alex Horton, reported that for the September 2nd strike, Hegseth had told the commander-in-chief of the special operations, a guy named Admiral Mitch Bradley, to leave no one alive, to kill everybody. And that he, in fact, because of that directive, had ordered this second strike. And that second strike, which is called a double tap, is a no-go, right? Okay, so this comes out, and then what happened from then on. You started to see at first the administration said this was entirely legal, and then they started to back away from it. And then last night, Pete Hegseth posted an AI-generated children's book cover from Franklin the Turtle with Franklin killing people in small boats. It was really, really horrific. And all of that led us to today. And what happened, and last night as well, because today's Tuesday, I guess, yesterday, Carolyn Leavitt, White House press secretary, said that in fact, while there had been a second strike, that it was not Pete Hegseth who had given the order. pretty clearly setting up Admiral Bradley to take the fall for this. And last night, that's what Pete Hegseth did. He said, I support this wonderful admiral for everything he has ordered, including the September 2nd strikes and everything from then on. So what he is doing is he's throwing Admiral Bradley absolutely under the bus. All right, so that brings us to today. And, a lot of you have asked what's going to happen with that. And I'm going to urge you to take a really big picture look here, because senators, including the heads of the Senate Armed Services Committee and the House Armed Services Committee, both Republicans, are like, we're looking into this because this is not okay. They were already pissed off about the operations in Venezuela, or off the coast of Venezuela, in the Caribbean and in the Eastern Pacific. So they were already mad, and they do not want there to be war crimes committed on their watch, partly because this is badly going to hurt American foreign policy, but also partly because we got people all over the world. If we're engaging in war crimes, other people can do the same thing. I mean, this is military 101 stuff. So the senators and the House Republicans, not all of them, but a lot of them, have said this is not okay. This is not okay. And under normal circumstances, somebody's head would roll over this. All right, so hold that thought, okay? Now let's go to what happened today. Today, let's go back to the middle of the night, actually. In the middle of the night last night, Trump began posting on Truth Social, and he did it with an almost manic quality. He posted more than 100 times. I think it was more than 200 times. I don't remember that off the top of my head. But he just was madly posting and posting and posting and posting and posting. And in a way that people, even at the time, were like, look at this. Look what's happening. This is bonkers, right? So he does that, and then there's also been this big thing about his the posting that he did over Thanksgiving, which was, again, really unhinged. And because of that, one of the things he did is he called Minnesota Governor Tim Walz a slur, what I will refer to as the R word, but a slur that is just so profoundly. That's one of my big, so not okay. But somebody asked Tim Walz about it yesterday, and he was like, listen, something's wrong with the guy. Like, it's Thanksgiving. Everybody else is playing Yahtzee, eating and watching football, and he's out there posting these screeds about getting rid of immigrants, and he's going to denaturalize them and using the R word, and he's not okay. And he had this MRI in October that he told us about by accident in November. We want to see what's in that MRI. So that night, Trump was on Air Force One, and he said to a reporter, sure, I'll release it. I don't know what it was for. Like, who doesn't know what an MRI is for? I don't, but I know it wasn't my brain because I aced it. I aced the cognitive test. He doesn't seem to be aware that the cognitive tests that he is getting appear to be for dementia. But then yesterday, the White House released the results, but they didn't say MRI. They said imaging, which I am so not a doctor, but a lot of people reading that said this is not the kind of imaging we are talking about. And it's very clear that he is not, that this memo does not mention his brain and any scans that they might have done for brains. And obviously you do brain scans to check on for dementia. For the health of the brain tissue. So that's all in the background. So then we get all this posting in the middle of the night. And then today, Trump did a televised cabinet meeting. And everything that I just told you is the lead up to this, for the lead up to this televised cabinet meeting, because a lot happened in that. So the first thing that happened is that Trump appears to have taken the side of Pete Hegseth. Hegseth basically blamed Bradley for the order again, and Trump basically stood behind Hegseth. Also, everybody around the table just completely said Trump was the best thing since sliced bread. Kristi Noem said he had stopped hurricanes from hitting the United States this year. Nothing was ever as great as Trump. And then he did a few things, one of which was he goes on a long rant about immigrants, about Somali immigrants. Obviously, Tim Walz is in his head because there are a lot of Somali immigrants in Minnesota. But also he went on a tirade about how affordability is a Democrat scam, is what he said. The word affordability, because it's not, they're turning it, the people's concerns about the cost of living into some kind of political event by Democrats. Okay, so that's out there. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. And you have the cabinet members all sort of saying he's just the best thing ever. And then as the cabinet members are saying this and how great he is, and he's the only one who can stop a war in Russia and on and on, he falls asleep. I mean, the dude cannot stay awake. And the reason I'm mentioning all of this stuff is because, well, you asked questions specifically about that double tap. There's a larger story here. And the larger story is that Trump and his administration is crumbling. He is crumbling. He is, just watch him. You don't have to take my word for it. Just watch him. And imagine what you would do if that were your relative, one. And two, remember that he is the most powerful person in the world with control over American nukes, the American Defense Department, with everything the United States of America stands for. And so he's crumbling, but now they've also got all these other problems. So you've got Hegseth deeply enmeshed in what certainly appears to be a war crime, even though he's blaming Bradley for it. Obviously, people know what happened, and I can't imagine they're all going to stay quiet. You've got Kristi Noem, the Secretary of Health and Homeland Security, who has been fingered as the person who overrode or who ignored Judge Boasberg's order not to deport that plane that Abrego Garcia was on all the way back at the beginning of the term. I have my doubts about whether or not it actually was her who gave the order personally, but that's the person that the administration has identified. You've also got her having the issue of funneling all that money, I think it's $220 million, to a contractor who subcontracted out things like the advertising that the Homeland Security Department has been doing, of like her riding the horse everywhere and all that, and being connected to some of those subcontractors, personally connected, especially through Corey Lewandowski, who's one of her advisors. Then you've also got this new report about the head of the FBI, Kash Patel, and his deputy head, Dan Bongino, that some of the people involved in the FBI has been reported where they say these guys just don't have any concept of what they're doing. So you've also got the fact that very quietly, a number of Trump's appointees have not been going through. They've had to pull, I think it's 57 of them, because they're just not being vetted. And even Kennedy of Louisiana, Senator Kennedy of Louisiana, is like, they're not even vetting these people. So you've got this kind of stew going on in the executive branch where you've got real issues of competency. And then, of course, you've got Pam Bondi, who is, her stuff's blowing up in her face. You've got those real issues of competency and what certainly seems to be, for a number of the people involved, issues of legality. That's what's going on in the executive branch. Now, you've got the legislative branch, the Congress, the House and the Senate, both controlled by Republicans, but both of which are exceedingly nervous about how angry the American people are about the executive branch, because the executive branch has just been going wild, right? It's been doing whatever it wants. So now you've got the legislative branch where these people need to get reelected or have to at least answer to their constituents. And they're angry. In the House, Republicans are angry at House Speaker Mike Johnson, who is refusing to put forward anything that Trump doesn't want. And in the Senate, they're mad at the House, but they're also mad at Trump because, for example, one of the things on the table right now is trying to extend those premium tax credits that are going to support the cost of healthcare policies under the Affordable Care Act. Now, Trump doesn't want those. Trump wants to get rid of that, and a lot of hard-right MAGA wants to get rid of that. But 78% of Americans want those extended. And the states that are going to be hardest hit by the loss of those are Republican states. So they've been trying to come up with a solution in Congress, especially in the Senate, but they can't because Trump won't settle on what he wants. And they don't want to bother to write something knowing that it'll go to him and he simply won't sign it. So now they're saying, well, it looks like that's dead in the water. That's going to be real popular, isn't it? So you've got this struggle going on within the Republican Party, but you also have a struggle going on now between certain Republican members of the Senate especially, but of the Senate and the House, and Trump loyalists. And you can see this playing out in a lot of different ways. You can see it with the number of discharge petitions that you're suddenly seeing in the House of Representatives. Discharge petitions are really rare. But you've got suddenly now, I think we're up to 3 discharge petitions. 2 have been successful, and now there's a discharge petition to try and get the ACA tax credits extended. So you're starting to see pushback against Johnson, and you're also starting to see senators really, really angry because Trump doesn't seem to care about any electeds. He seems to be like, I'm going to do whatever I want. He's not even trying to make nice with the American people. He sits there and says, affordability, everything's fine. But what's interesting about that whole concept of affordability is it's not just about the cost of coffee. It's not just about the cost of gas. It's not just about the cost of housing. What I think we are seeing is Americans across political parties finally articulating their frustration with a political system that has concentrated wealth among a very small group of people who now are easily identified as being part of what others have called, and I have adopted, the Epstein class. Those people who have more money than God and who are untouchable, who just can flout the law without any repercussions, or have been able to until now. And that cuts across parties, it cuts across professions, but you know exactly the kind of people that I'm talking about. So you got to throw that in this mix as well, and I'll come back to that in just a second. So you've got all these things going on, and you can see how scared the Republican electeds are right now if you look at the special election being held today in Tennessee. And if any of you are here from Tennessee and you are haven't voted yet, just turn me off and go vote, right? Because that special election in that district, in the Tennessee district where it is being held, I believe that district went for Trump by 22 points. So less than a year after that election, are we less than a year? No, we're just over a year after the 2024 election. The Republicans should be able to run a stuffed animal in that election and win. But voters are so unhappy and are articulating their unhappiness to the point that people have been pouring money into that election. And the Democrat is within striking distance of winning that election. And that's why somebody said, why is everyone paying so much attention to this special election in Tennessee? And the answer to that is that Democrats have been overperforming by between 14 and 16 points. This is a 22-point district, I think, off the top of my head. So everyone's watching to see how the Democrat will do, to see just how fragile the Republican MAGA coalition has been. But now let's go back quickly to what I was just saying about Trump not caring about what the voters want, because I think you can see this dramatically in a lot of ways. I mean, Carolyn Leavitt, the way she talks to people, Trump's inability to control himself when he calls a reporter piggy, for example, but also Hegseth's posting of that made up children's book, in which he appeared to make fun of open murder by the American people, because those people represent us, showed such a profound disrespect, not only for the murdered people and the country from which they came, but for us. But for those of us who say, we care about the laws of war, we care about laws, we care about the rule of law, and we're concerned that you stepped over it. Tom Nichols of The Atlantic, who's a scholar of the military and the national security, said he's like a punk. He's like some punk who got caught doing something wrong, and he's challenging the fuzz, that's an old-fashioned expression for the cops, to take him in because his daddy is, do you know who my daddy is? And that's kind of the feeling that you get from what the administration is doing. And that brings up another question. How long will the elected Republicans put up with that? Because the clear goal from the beginning of the Trump administration has been essentially to rig the 2026 and 2028 elections so Trump could never lose. He was pretty clear about that. Not Trump in 28. He's never going to make it that far. But that was pretty clearly what he was up to. It's not at all clear at this point that that's going to work, because the realignment that people like me see is one that is not simply the old Democrats, Republicans dichotomy, but it is a general realignment of the American people against this Epstein class. And that cuts absolutely across parties. This is how you get Marjorie Taylor Greene announcing she's going to resign right after she gets her pension and writing a screed that sort of says, I'm here for the American people. And a lot of people say, you can't trust her. Of course you can't trust her. But it's always important to watch how these people talk, because they are trying to model and reflect back what they're hearing from their constituents. So you're seeing it from Marjorie Taylor Greene. You're certainly seeing it from independents. And you are also seeing it from Democrats who are talking not only about not only about accountability, not only about affordability, but also pretty dramatically about reclaiming American democracy from this small elite that is trying to take everything. So if you are, a number of the comments that I always get are, where is there any hope? How can we hope for anything here? And the answer to that is stop thinking about individual crises. I mean, still participate in those. We need to protect our Somali neighbors. We need, the things that ICE is doing are unconscionable. All of those things are still there and must be combated. The bigger picture, though, certainly seems to be an executive branch that is increasingly just essentially saying F you to the American people. And the question of how elected Republicans and other people in the country will respond to that. And if you're an elected Republican, what does that look like? Trump is falling apart. Watch him. He is falling apart. He's under enormous stress. He can't stay awake in his own televised cabinet meeting. He's got incompetent people around him who are committing war crimes. And those Epstein files are, I believe we're at 19 days toward the deadline of when those things have to come out. And a lot of people are like, well, they're not going to turn them all out. No, I feel certain they're going to do their best to hide them and to do, to redact them and do all kinds of stuff. But I keep saying to you, think of how many people have seen them and who can say, wait a minute here, I saw that document and what's missing from it is X. And a lot of them are not going to be willing to continue to cover up for people who are doing things like committing war crimes. So where you should get hope is the fact that we are watching this administration really sort of collapse in real time. I mean, it's a lot coming at us all the time, but it's in many ways fascinating. A lot of these storylines are sort of coming to a crashing end. But now that being said, it's going to get really ugly. It's going to get really ugly before it gets better. So, all of those sayings about, narcissists ending up in madness, and the dying mule kicks hardest, and a cornered rat bites, and all that sort of thing. That's what we're going into in December, January, February. We're going into this crash between the executive branch, members of Congress, if they stand up to it, and the American people. So I'm not saying it's time to pop your champagne. I'm saying it is, the larger picture is not of an administration that is consolidating power. It is an administration that is crashing in on itself. And you see this in the Trump's popularity numbers, which are in the mid 30s. And people say that's still too many people. Remember that you're always, always, always going to have a reactionary movement is always going to have at least 22% to 25% of the people behind it for various reasons. But if your floor is 22% and he's at 35, he's not doing real well. And you've got the problem, the crisis of the economy. You've got the crisis of the appointees. You've got the crisis of Trump's own mental acuity. You've got all these things sort of crumbling at the same time or smashing together at the same time. Imagine what it would look like if you had a mentally competent, quite skilled politician doing what, consolidating the kind of power that Trump is doing. It'd be a very different story altogether. So that's out there in this moment as well. Let me see, did I get everything here? Yeah, I think I got everything that you were interested in, at least that I could do in this amount of time. So what would I tell you to watch now? If I were telling you what are the things to watch, I'm watching Trump's brain. First of all, that's the first thing. And second of all, watch what especially the Republicans in the Senate do. That's where the real pressure is starting to ramp up, but there should be a lot more of it. And it'll be interesting to see what happens in that Tennessee special election. Now, a lot of you have asked me to predict what's going to happen going forward. I don't know. We've never been in a moment like this in American history before. But I will tell you this. Now is the time to keep the pressure up. And for the next several months, by the way, when it is time to breathe, I will tell you when it is time to breathe. But right now, the more involved you are at the local level, at the state level, in protests, and those protests are economic as well as political, is supporting your neighbors, all the things that people are talking about doing out there. Spreading the word. What needs to happen is more Americans need to understand what is happening and why it matters, and also articulating what we want going forward, because we are not going back to January 19th, 2021. We're just not. But if we're not going to do that, let's make it better. Like, what are the issues that matter to you? I mean, I care about universal health care. But mostly I care about education and journalism. That's where my muscle is going to really go, is into trying to reshape American education. Figure out what your lane is and start getting involved with people who do that. That doesn't mean we have to have all the answers, but it does mean that when we hit the ground running, we want to be able to articulate what we want. And crucially, we want to have people in office who will be able to translate those desires into actual legislation and funding, that's actually quite hard as well. And we haven't talked a lot about that on in this channel, but I will, because articulating what you want is really important. But then electing the people who can pull the right strings is key to making those ideas actually become reality. And those are not the same skill sets. We need both of those sets of people. The people who can best articulate what we want are almost never those people who can figure out how to create coalitions that make them happen. And people often make that mistake of thinking that somebody who articulates a vision very well is going to be able to make it happen. It's just a different skill set, and they can't do it. And similarly, sometimes you want those invisible workhorses because they know which buttons to push to get enough people on board to make something happen. So going forward now, keep up the pressure and don't get discouraged. What is happening is horrific. Don't forget that ever, because that's really important that we keep that naivete, if you will, to care deeply about our humanity and our laws. But while keeping that in mind, it's important to remember that the larger picture is one in which this administration is under enormous stress, and the momentum is on the side of those people pushing back against it. And the more voices we have in this, in whatever way you are comfortable speaking up, the better chance we have of both getting rid of those oligarchs who are trying to destroy the United States, but also of building something on the other side that more adequately addresses the larger needs of the American people, which is, after all, the point of a democracy. So I actually kind of took the day off today, because for once it felt like I wasn't the only one who was keeping tabs on this administration and really pushing hard. Now it turns out I do have something to say, but now is not the time to despair. To the contrary, this is the time really to bear down and recognize that time and the ravages of age and of stupidity are on the side of American democracy right now. They're really helping us out. Trump's not going to get better. These guys are not going to suddenly become more competent at their jobs. The economy is not suddenly going to miraculously recover. And we are increasingly getting our muscle behind us.
Washington. Yes, I'm not even going to try and begin to guess why my phone was using. Actually, I do know why. Joanna and I did an Instagram uptown, and my iPhone overheated and went down in the middle of the Instagram, which is a pity because it was a really good recording. And it must have somehow locked on and Bluetoothed it over here. I don't know why. Anyway, sorry about that. I'm back. I'm going to let some people come in for a bit while I look and see where people are from. Raymond, Maine. Beth, nice to see you. New Mexico, Eugene, Oregon. Yes, I'm sorry, I didn't realize I was showing up as a black square. Kansas, Worcester, excellent. All right, and Tacoma Park, Katja. That's my Katja. Rural Missouri. And let me go ahead and tell you what we're going to do today, just because I don't have much time today. It's not going to be I'm only going to be here for about 15 minutes today. And the reason for that is because, and I will reiterate this, what I said yesterday about us all doing what we do best, I'm pretty good at the media. And so I've been doing media all day, and I'm going to do another big hit at 4:15. So I did want to stop in for a minute, and that's why I'm cutting you all short today. But I promise I'm going to do more of these as we go forward. All right, so I want to say just a couple of things today. You will note that I did not take questions, because what are our questions, right? Is there any doubt? I want to be clear about a couple of things, and I want to start with what is all over the media, a crisis in the Democratic Party about whether or not President Joe Biden should be at the top of the ticket. And I'm getting all kinds of mail from people saying, why do you support Biden, and why doesn't he step down? I want to be really clear. For me, this is not about Biden. This is about the way the system works. It is now July. There is an election in November. Right now, the entire ground game, the money, the offices, the staffing, everything is Biden. And if we try and switch that now, what that will mean is absolutely utter chaos, first of all. And second of all, people keep forgetting that the reason that Biden and Harris are at the top of that ticket is because they are the two people who can nail together the demographic the Democrats need in 2020 or 2024. It was 2020 as well, but 2024. So looking at it systemically, that's what's going on there. And my other piece of that is that I have spent time within the last 6 weeks with the president. He's fine. But what you are seeing is the media creating its own story. And that is extraordinarily frustrating to me. I think it is completely reasonable to ask about a president's health and about a president's mental capacity and so on. But you will notice they are not doing that about Donald Trump, who has not been able to string a sentence together for at least 5 years, and who is morbidly obese and who is only 3 years younger than the president. I mean, there are many, aside from policies. So the idea that second guessing this decision now would help the Democrats is a media creation, because again, one of the things that somebody who studies politics like me will tell you is that you can have your fantasy football team, the same, the fantasy political team, the same way you have your fantasy football team. All of those people have baggage that has not been publicly aired. I don't know what it is, but by definition, they have baggage that has not been publicly aired. So if you start to say, oh, let's put in this person, let's put in this person, let's put in this person, first of all, you've got the demographic problem I talked about, because if you put anybody but Kamala Harris at the top of that ticket, many people would walk away from the Democratic Party, and that's not at all unreasonable. But second of all, anybody that you are thinking of, I promise you, has a backstory that the media would eat up. The same way that they are eating up this age story with Biden, and they're not even bothering with all the extraordinary stories about Trump and the people around Trump. For example, that the Trump organization has signed 2 huge contracts in the last week with the country of Oman and Saudi Arabia. That seems to me to be of extraordinary concern compared to a bad debate. So I'm very much of the school that I don't really care who is at the top of the Democratic ticket. I think the people in the Democratic White House right now, including Vice President Kamala Harris, are enormously impressive. Gina Raimondo at Commerce, Pete Buttigieg at Transportation is out of this world. It's a good group of people. And if the person at the head of it is not there to finish a term, I could not care less, personally. But don't make the mistake of thinking that this is me out there saying, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, anybody but Biden is going to be a disaster. If that's what the party chooses to do, I will go along with that, because here's the real story. The real story is this is no longer about Democrats and Republicans. It is no longer about partisanship. It is about the rule of law on which this country was based. And yesterday morning, the Supreme Court tore up that rule of law. And what that means, let's start with the fact that the sentencing for Donald Trump's convictions, 34 criminal convictions, has now been put off until September 18th because he is challenging those convictions, because part of the decision that I did not write about last night, someone wrote and asked me about that, is that there are, if the president has been conferring with official people in the administration, that cannot be used to establish motive. And so all of a sudden, the pieces of that criminal conviction that established that Trump was trying to hide those payments before the election, the Supreme Court has said are inadmissible to court. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know how that's going to play out, but that should say something to you, that a jury of his peers unanimously found the president guilty of 34 criminal counts. And because of that Supreme Court decision, that is now back on the table. So what we are looking at in this moment is the destruction of the rule of law. And I think you can feel it. People are nervous. Nobody knows what's going to happen next. And if you add on top of that Loper Bright, which came out a few days before, which said all of a sudden the regulatory system in the United States is in trouble, and Snyder, which came out before that, a couple days before that, which said that elected officials can take gratuities after the fact. They can't take bribes ahead of an official action, but they can take gratuities afterward, which pretty much looks like a gift to Clarence Thomas. What you're looking at is a country that suddenly had the rule of law, and the world in which we have lived torn up. And if you add Dobbs to that, everything's in the air. What we are looking at now is 4 months. Somebody corrected me. I said 5 months yesterday. We're down to 4 months for those of us who believe in the rule of law, who believe in law and order, to reassert the fact that this is our country. This is our democracy. And I want to reiterate that the radical extremists, and they're not Republicans. They are, they're under that rubric now. But if you are listening to me and you used to be a Republican and you don't know what happened to your party, what happened to your party is it got taken over by a group of radicals, radical extremists who want to destroy democracy. And we need, going forward, to bring all of those who care about the rule of law and law and order to push back against them. Because the world that they are offering to us is, and I'm not prone to sweeping, huge, frightened statements. It is apocalyptic. I mean, think of everything that Trump has said about American carnage and about taking vengeance on people and about making the military and the Department of Justice and everything dependent on him. That will come true. Now, remember, they would not be pushing these things if they were a majority. They are not. Trump's base is between 27 and 32% of the American population. You can maybe throw on a few more people who are just sexist or xenophobic. They don't like immigrants, but he does not get above 42% of the American people. He just doesn't. That puts more than almost 60% of people on the other side. But what they are trying to do is terrify us, worry us, get us to hide under the beds so that we do not push back. So where I want to go with this, in the 2 minutes I have left is in this broadcast, is what you can do. Because people are writing to me saying, what can I do? I want to reiterate what I said yesterday. Now is the time for you to do what you do best. I don't know what that is. Somebody wrote to me this morning, they're a marketer, said they would get stuff out there. Aces. Somebody else wrote to me and said, both my spouse and I were in the military. We want to write op-eds for the military papers. Can you help us with that? Of course I can help you with that. But also, so can those of you who are editors. If you are willing to take what you do best and to put it into this cause, that will not only help what happens in the voting in November, it will help people to remember that we are a country that values moderation, we value community, we value caring about each other, and what the people running on the Republican ticket in 2024 offer is a world without freedom, is a world in which women die because they have no control over their bodily autonomy. And that, of course, isn't going to include anybody who wants to have a baby or love somebody who wants to have a baby, because, of course, abortion care is also miscarriage care. What they are offering is a world in which we have book bans, in which we no longer have public schools because they're pushing everything toward private religious schools. We need to push back against that and reassert the values that the people who established in 1776 the idea that we would not have kings first articulated. That's our mission for the next 4 months. So I've got 1 more minute here, going into the 4th of July, wear your flag pins, fly your American flags. By God, this is our country. We're the ones who represent what it has always meant, and we're the ones who have the power to bring it back. The media is not going to save us. The politicians are not going to save us. The financiers aren't going to save us. You know who's going to save us? The same people who saved us in the Civil Rights Movement, the same people who saved us in the 1930s, the same people who saved us in the Progressive era, the same people who saved us in the 1850s and the 1860s. You know who those people are? They are us. This is our moment. So go out, do whatever you can do, both to calm yourself, but to create community that can indicate to those around us that keeping a democratic government, whether it's headed by Joe Biden or whomever they come up with, ham sandwich, I don't care, is worth saving. All right, I got to run because this is my part. I'm going to go do a media hit. You always ask about these, and this is, I don't know. If I find out, I'll let you know. Thank you for being here. I will let you know in the future with better timing when I do these. Thanks for being here.
Hey, Danny, how are you? Oh, you got eggs. Well, that's fun. Connecticut, San Antonio. Hey, Emma, how are you? Morgantown, West Virginia. I bet northern Indiana's cold right now. So, hi, everybody. I'm sorry I was away last week. I wrote to you from a train and thought I would end up at home that night, and it didn't work out. It was not a great trip back from where I was coming because of the cold and the snow. You've asked a few questions here. I guess I'll let a few people come in more before I tell you what I'm doing next. Wait a minute. Hey, Gwen. Oh, good. I'm glad, Gwen. California, will Hegseth be confirmed? You know, I don't predict the future. All right, so a couple of things. First of all, so a lot of people are asking me about leaving Facebook. I do not think at this moment that I will leave Facebook simply because I feel like I need to be here. Because I have a very large following here and it feels important to put the kind of information I put on here. I understand why other people want to leave, and I fully respect that. I will and have been working on really using my YouTube channel so that I can do these talks and others there on the YouTube channel. That's actually where I just came from, is talking to some people over there. And I will keep you posted. I will post on this website when I flip over there. I will try and broadcast here as well, but I am moving to YouTube is the bottom line. At least that's what the plan is as of right now. And I'll keep you into all this. I do want you to remember, and I keep trying to post this in places. I do post the letters that I write every night. I do post them on Substack. It is free. To get them, either you can read them. You don't have to sign up for anything. My best friend has not signed up. She goes there every day and she reads it because she doesn't want to put her name in anywhere. You can just go to Substack. It's called Letters from an American. It's my name, Heather Cox Richardson, all lowercase, .substack.com. You can either read there, you can just Google Letters from an American and it'll take you there. There is no paywall for my stuff, or you can have it sent to you to your email. There's no paywall for that either. But if you put in your credit card, which some people do, and you're welcome to, I mean, I do have to have some help, so that's what I use that money for. But don't feel like you have to do that at all. If you put in your credit card, it will charge you. The only thing that gets you is I do write extra pieces sometimes, and not on politics, usually on history or on things I'm thinking about. Or you can't comment without it for the simple reason that I don't want to have to moderate those talks. I have too much to do already. So if you want to leave Facebook, you can still find me other places without a problem. Just remember that that's there, and tell other people too, please, because I was shocked. I'm always shocked when I get notes saying that people really love my podcasts, and is there any chance I would make transcripts of them? They don't even know the letters exist. The podcasts, are just me reading the letter, but they didn't know the letters existed. So please tell people about that. And remember, my stuff will never be paywalled. That's the whole point. I understand people need to do that. I am in a very fortunate position. I do not have to paywall my material. And so go ahead and use it. Tell other people to use it. It's my service to America. All right, so some very simple questions here to start with, and the easy questions, I think. We'll see. I'm going to start with one that I thought was interesting, and then I'm going to get into the Trump administration. Somebody said, I'm always talking about Biden's successes. What about his failures? And why don't I ever talk about those? That's a really good question. And I do think it's important to remember that what I do is slightly different than other people, as in, I am not a journalist, I'm a historian. which means that I am looking for long-term patterns in American history. And so I'm usually looking to tell you what did happen, not what I think is going to happen, because I'm a big believer in the idea you don't know what's going to happen, but also because what doesn't happen is often part of a pattern, but it's a much harder pattern to see. For me anyway. So I thought that was so I don't always, I usually don't write about things until they do happen. And unless they say something important, I think about something that establishes a pattern. So if I'm going to point to my real disappointment with the Biden administration, it's that the Democrats did not get through the Voting Rights Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act that were their first and second priorities when they came into office in 2021, because I believe that from the vote, everything else comes. Now, of course, Joe Manchin of West Virginia and Kyrsten Sinema, then, both of whom are now out of the Senate, but who was a senator from Arizona, said they would not support those. And the Democrats did not have enough votes to override a filibuster in the Senate in order to get those acts through. I understand why they didn't do it, but I think that's a huge, huge problem in our country, because not only did those things protect voting rights, they also got rid of partisan gerrymandering. And I think partisan gerrymandering is the second worst thing in our system. I think the first worst thing is the amount of money that's involved in our system. And what that does when somebody, literally, we have just seen the richest man in the world buy a presidency. So that is an enormous frustration for me. That being said, one of the things that has frustrated me to no end is all the articles that you're seeing nowadays coming out saying, oh, Biden was a failure, Biden was a failure. And my take, because Trump returned to office, and my take on that is that's rather like imagining Abraham Lincoln running, mind you, I'm not trying to make a parallel in terms of the men, Lincoln and Biden, but rather like saying that Abraham Lincoln didn't do a very good job if the Confederates had not left Congress. Because what Biden had to do is not only contend with the problems that were going on in society at large, but he had to contend with what I would consider a disloyal minority, even in his first 2 years. And considering that, they got an astonishing amount done. But what he was supposed to do about a disloyal minority still holding positions of power is absolutely unclear to me. With an exception, I'm not even going to look here because I'm certain I'm going to see it. Why didn't Trump go to jail? And I'm going to jump in here right now to the report that came out last night, little after midnight, from Jack Smith, which is really interesting. I read it this morning. I would suggest to you might want to read it. Now, I think it's 137 pages long, but before you roll your eyes at that, remember that it's divided into a number of different sections, and the one that really is the one most people will be interested in is that first section that lays out exactly what Trump did. And much of that, maybe not most, but much of that is footnotes. So there are a number of pages that have this much writing and this much footnotes. So the actual amount of reading is pretty small. And it's what's known as a talking document, which instructs you what's happening as you go. Now, there's another section about why they thought certain things were chargeable or not. There's another section about precedent. There's a lot of other stuff going on that I'll explain to you in a second, but it's worth taking a look at because it doesn't say anything I didn't know and that I haven't written about, but seeing it all right there is truly shocking. But what is really interesting to me in that material, that totally shocking material about how Trump openly lied about winning the election. He knew he was lying. He worked to get states to throw out votes. He worked to create false electors. When none of those things worked, he then worked to whip up his people to put pressure on then Vice President Mike Pence to stay in office. But what I found most shocking, truly shocking, was when you see it laid out like that, you realize the power of lying. Trump was lying, and he knew he was lying. And yet our society is suffering terribly because of those lies. And that, I think, is going to be a really important recognition going forward, the extraordinary power of lies and the extraordinary importance of pushing back against them. So that's my big takeaway from that first part of the document, because again, if you've been following this, there's not a lot you don't know, although it's very streamlined, it's very clear, but it just makes you realize the extraordinary damage that one person full of malice can do in a really heightened way. It really shows, and it really does echo what was known as the big lie from Adolf Hitler and his supporters in Germany, who did something very similar. But there are a couple other things that you're going to be interested in. One of them is, I keep hearing this, and people keep writing to me about why can't Trump be disqualified under the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, which says you can't hold office if you've engaged in insurrection, when a number of courts have decided that he did engage in insurrection. And I would like to point out that the Senate, Republicans in the Senate, acquitted Trump of incitement to insurrection in the second impeachment. So he was acquitted of that by senators. Now, they were all Republican senators, and they weren't all the Republican senators, but he has been acquitted of incitement of insurrection. But what Jack Smith said was that, listen, there's some court precedents that say that he committed insurrection, but that law hasn't been used in 100 years. And it's also not clear what exactly, for legal purposes, insurrection means. That is, and I'm being a little bit vague here because I don't want to make the whole legal argument. You know, I'm not a lawyer, but you can read this, it's all in there. But usually an insurrection means overthrowing an existing government, whereas what Trump did was he tried to stay in power. And that's got there's a different word for that. And Smith was like, I'm not sure that we could have won on that. And what they were trying to do was make sure everything they put forward, they could win on. Now, with those two things going forward, it makes it hard now for people to say, and who those people would be, to say Trump can't take office under the 14th Amendment, because under the third section of the 14th Amendment, because he committed insurrection. Do I think he committed insurrection? Absolutely. But that and $3.90 on average across the United States will get you a cup of coffee. So that is the other thing that was in the Smith document. And the other thing that really jumped out to me in the document was the section when Smith talks about how Trump weaponized the courts to make sure he wouldn't be tried. Because Smith argues, of course, that they would have convicted him on those 4 federal counts, that a jury would have convicted him on 4 counts. That's what they wouldn't have gone forward with those if they didn't think they could win them. But the combination of the Supreme Court absolutely slow walking his case and then declaring contrary to all precedent and to the well-established ideals of the founders of the nation with the Declaration of Independence and the framers of the Constitution, that a president must never be above the law, they decided contrary to that. And that, of course, gave Trump an enormous out. But then also they talk about the many ways in which they would, for example, subpoena a witness, and they would refuse to go. They would work that all the way through the courts till they would lose, and then they'd find something else to do. And at one point, Twitter simply refused to answer a subpoena, and they challenged that, and that took them, many months to get what they wanted out of that. And that suggests, I don't know what that suggests, but it's kind of an eye-opener of the extraordinary degree to which Trump weaponized our legal system against us, because at the end of the day, the legal system is ours. And he managed to weaponize that and to weaponize his lies to the point that he is now about to become the president of the United States again. And that's not okay. It's not okay that somebody lied and cheated their way into the presidency. And I don't mean that, I mean that in a current modern day sense, but I also mean it as somebody who is trying to defend the concepts of American democracy. I have 100% certainty that none of the framers of the Constitution would have winked at Trump becoming president. They simply wouldn't have done it. This is exactly what they feared. And that's not okay, that we are now sitting here going, oh, well, oopsie poopsie. And we're doing so because somebody acted the way he did. And we could talk about how he got there. But I'm going to go on to some other things because I think that you are more interested. I could be wrong, but I think that you're more interested in that to start. All right. So if that's the case, so somebody just mentioned Trump keeping Hitler's book on his nightstand. That seems somewhat established. I will say, I don't think he ever read it. I don't think he's what one would call a big reader. Anyway. So some questions you asked here. Let me take another easy one first, and that is, why on earth isn't Biden insisting on the publication of the Equal Rights Amendment? And the answer to that, I think, is because the archivist has said that the general counsel has said that that there's too many legal questions surrounding that for it to be published. I've talked about this before. New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand has said that they should publish it anyway, because then the Republicans would have to explain why they didn't support it. I would suggest that it's going to be difficult carrying things forward going in the next 4 years at least, because all of these things will end up before the Supreme Court. And having the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment, providing that women are created equal into the Constitution, putting that before this Supreme Court seems to me a very good argument for not doing it. I'm not taking a position on that in this moment, but please stop writing to me and asking me why that's happening. That I think is what's going on with that. All right. So let me step back a minute here and talk about where we are right now. And that is that Biden is leaving this country with an extraordinary economy and with a much stronger hand in foreign affairs than he had from the Trump administration. And that is going to be interesting going forward, because you're already seeing members of the incoming Trump administration trying to talk that down. J.D. Vance the other day was saying, well, frankly, Biden's just left us such a mess. We're not going to be able to do a lot of what we said we were going to do because it's such a mess. That's just a lie. This is the strongest economy we've had in at least 50 years. And in foreign affairs, NATO is stronger than it ever has been. And the axis that has been trying to push against democracies has been extraordinarily weakened. And I'm not going to talk a lot about foreign affairs today, because you're going to hear a lot about foreign affairs from me for the next week. But that too is much stronger than it was, in part because what the Biden administration tried to do was it tried to spread the concepts of democracy without spreading imperialism. And that's a hard needle to thread. And what they did is they set up I keep calling them ad hoc committees. They've all got fancy names for it, but they tried to bring together different countries around shared interests, like dealing with the fentanyl crisis, like dealing with supply chain issues, individual certain things. But what that did was it meant that they tried to empower other countries to solve problems in their own spaces. And for the most part, it seems to have been effective. Like I say, I'm not 100% sold either way on it, but it is notable that Hezbollah, Hamas are dramatically weakened, and that Assad fell in Syria, which is, of course, weakening Iran and Russia. I mean, there's a lot going on. Like I say, I think we're going to be a long time figuring out whether all that mess was worth it. But there we have it. All right. So if they're leaving this incredibly strong hand to the Trump administration, what is the Trump administration going to do? So mind you, I'm not going to predict the future, but I am going to tell you where things stand at this moment. And at this moment, it is really, really, really worth remembering, first of all, that the Republican Party is badly splintered. That is, those members of the Republican Party who controlled it before Trump came on the scene, say in 2015, essentially were oligarchs. That is, they didn't like a lot of people voting, and you can see this from the Voting Restriction Acts that they began in 1986, but that really took off in the 1990s, and that they have continued to push and push and push, because when every American votes, Democrats win. And they win because Americans, in this our incarnation, because Americans like business regulations. We like a basic social safety net. We like infrastructure projects, and we like civil rights protected. Those things we like. And by the way, until the 1990s, Republicans liked that as well. And independents have always liked it too. So it's been incumbent on them to get rid of a lot of voting, because if a lot of people vote, I mean, you can see this all the time. Democrats are right now, this is not a historic look, by the way, I'm only looking at the moment. Right now, when Democrats are in power, they try and expand the vote, and Republicans always try and get rid of it. So those people who were in charge until about 2015 wanted wealth to concentrate. They liked the idea of relying on markets. They liked the idea of supply side economics, which meant that that you turn the markets loose to concentrate wealth at the very top, because they argued anyway that if people at the very top had a lot of money, they would invest it in new businesses, everybody would have jobs, and money would percolate up from the top down to the bottom and back up again. And the problem with that system was, in fact, it didn't work. And between 1981 and 2021, $50 trillion moved from the bottom 90% of Americans to the top 1% of Americans. And so while they really liked it, the way they kept voters behind that idea was constantly saying, well, you feel like you're being squeezed, but that's because minorities are taking your tax dollars. And in fact, if you look at the numbers, you can see pretty clearly that, if you remember Bill Clinton in the 1990s, he balanced the budget. There was a surplus in the budget. What killed the surplus was George W. Bush's tax cuts, the unfunded wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and then Trump's tax cuts of 2017. That's not social welfare stuff. That's tax cuts and an unfunded military. All right, so they liked that, but they didn't want to, they really were using the kind of racism and sexism that Trump tapped into to keep voters behind them. They recognize the importance of a modern economy, which means you need to have women and people of color involved in the economy and so on. Maybe some of them were racist, many of them were closet racists and sexists, but really they were focusing on the economy. Now, what happened when Trump came in is he rode those that racism and sexism and the truly awful stuff into power. And I've talked about how that happened both on these chats, and I've written a ton about it. But what that meant was that, especially after the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia in 2017, he wedded the Republican Party to those racists and sexists and their evangelical voters who made up his base, and began to promise them that rather than relying on markets to drive the economy, he would put in place those religious tenets that they want so badly. Now, they're a very small fraction of America. They are a very small fraction of people, but I think it's about 4%. But they have now got the vehicle of the Republican Party behind them. Now, that old establishment group, they wanted Trump's voters, but they don't want to lose the reliance on a market, because they don't want Trump to be able to say, or Ron DeSantis, who did it, well, you can't have a gay day, or you can't rely on markets. You have to rely on a religious set of beliefs, and you have to rely on the Don't Say Gay law, for example, or the things that Mike Pence put in Indiana, or you have to get rid of abortion rights. They know that will hurt their businesses, and they don't want that stuff. So they already have a fight between the reactionaries that are supporting Trump for religious reasons, but also those people who have become fervent MAGA people who want to destroy the American government by for example, refusing to raise the debt ceiling or refusing to fund the government, because that will destroy America's economic power. And those old establishment Republicans depend on that. So do the rest of us, by the way. But they don't want to crash into the debt ceiling any more than somebody like me does. We may not agree about oligarchy, we may not agree about any number of things, but we share that agreement in a way that we don't with those MAGA Republicans like Chip Roy, who wants to let America hit the debt ceiling and default on its debt. So the establishment Republicans do not like the MAGA Republicans one teeny tiny little bit. And you can see this in Mitch McConnell, for example, who was quite clear about the fact that he was protecting Trump in his first impeachment because he wanted his voters for the 2020 presidential election, and in his second impeachment because he thought Trump was going to go away and he wanted those voters for the Republican Party. And now he's stuck with him. And now McConnell is stuck with Trump. So you've got that split, but you also have a very other important split going on within MAGA. And this is I can't emphasize how important this is. The people who got Trump elected in 2016, people like Steve Bannon, people who glommed hold of him like Laura Loomer, they believe in that reactionary, traditionalist, isolationist American society that Trump talks about. But now the people who've put him in office are the tech bros. It was Elon Musk, who's a very late comer to Trumpism, who put, I think it's about $270 million behind Trump, essentially buying him the presidential election. And one of the other guys put $100 million behind him. I mean, they are people of extraordinary wealth who have recognized that so long as they can get the power of the United States government behind their schemes of Bitcoin, for example, or going to Mars or whatever, creating a new global world, they're going to be able to put it in place. But their plans for increased immigration, for example, for a global society, run smack up against the old MAGA. They share some interests in that they both want to destroy American society as it currently is, and in the American government as it currently is. But that's it. So the whole reason I'm telling you all about this is because the Republican Party is badly splintered. And in Congress, it has teeny weeny majorities. So Trump can be out there screaming all he wants about a mandate, but in fact, more Americans voted for somebody other than him. And in the House of Representatives right now, I think the Republicans can lose 2 votes before they've lost a vote. And the Senate, I think it's 3 votes. I don't quote me on that one, but it's really teeny tiny. Now, when she was in charge of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, a Democrat from California, also had very small minorities, but she is a master of creating coalitions and of making sure everybody got on board to get votes through. If there is one thing Mike Johnson is not, it's a master tactician. Remember, he is a politician who won re-election through gerrymandering and at first by not having an opponent, and was a backbencher. He's the 5th person they tried to come up with as a Speaker of the House. He does not have the skills that he needs to nail a coalition together to get very much done. All right, so Thune in the Senate is different. Thune is actually probably quite good at what he does. He's been an understudy to Mitch McConnell, the former Senate Majority Leader. But Thune is not a MAGA. Thune is an establishment Republican. So he has very little interest in empowering MAGA in the Republican Party. So why am I telling you all this? I'm telling you all this because before you start wondering what's going to happen and what the Republicans are going to do and all that, you have to recognize that this is not a landslide and this is not a juggernaut at all. This is a group of people who are in what my mother would have called a mell of a Hess. All right? So putting that aside, okay, so there's that. Now, what's Trump going to do going forward? He has promised everything to everybody because, as Josh Marshall of Talking Points Memo points out, Trump just wanted to stay out of jail, which is where I started this chat. He was going to promise anything to anyone so long as he could stay out of jail And so long as he could put together a coalition of people who would be loyal to him. To him. Now, again, let's think about how he does this. There was an interview with Jeffrey Epstein, got very little traction, and I don't really know why. I guess because the campaign was going on. But Epstein actually talked about, there's a reporter who has a number of recordings of Epstein talking about his relationship with Donald Trump, which is a very close relationship, by the way. And one of the things he said is that Trump's, and you guys, anybody who's dealt with a personality like this will recognize this, that Trump's way of dealing with his people is to get them arguing amongst each other. So, to make them jealous of each other, to make one person think he's listening to someone else and get them all fighting. And then he steps in to say, oh, you children, stop fighting. I can fix this. So he has promised, that's how he deals with people. And he has promised explicitly contradictory things to different groups of people. So, for example, he promised the Steve Bannon and Steve Miller Republicans, MAGAs, that he was going to do these huge deportation raids. He promised people like Elon Musk that he was going to cut and Chip Roy, although they're not on the same team in most things, that he was going to cut the deficit significantly. The problem is that the deportation raids are going to cost between $88 billion and $315 billion a year, which is a huge sum of money. And you can't do that and cut the budget unless you cut the budget somewhere else. But every place else that they're talking about cutting the budget are programs that are really popular. At the same time, Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy want to increase immigration, a certain kind of immigration for the people who work in their tech industries. So how do you do that? I mean, that is literally not a circle you can square. I mean, this is one thing I do when I think about politics, because I'm looking for patterns in politics, is how do you make this happen? So if I want to accomplish something in politics, how would I do that? Where are the levers of that? But you can't say, I'm going to make people wet and dry at the same time. There's just no lever that you can pull that's going to make you able to do that. And similarly, he has promised to leave abortion to the states. People voted on that basis. And he promised the evangelicals that he was going to give them a national abortion ban. That was in the Republican platform under the concept of protecting a fertilized egg with the protections of the 14th Amendment. You can go look this up. So how do you do that? How do you both have a national abortion ban and protect abortion in the states? Wet and dry, same time. Similarly, he was going to have all these tariffs and lower prices, which tariffs by definition raise prices. That's what they've always done. There's no way around this. And what he did during the campaign is he simply told the people who said that, you're wrong, you're stupid, I'm right. Good luck with that, because literally that's what tariffs do. So there's no way to both have tariffs and lower prices. It just doesn't work that way. So you've got this guy coming in who has promised to keep people wet and dry at the same time, who is not a good manager of people, who's got not a lot of public support, who's got his political party splintered and having tiny majorities in Congress. All right. How's he going to handle this? If think about it, if you're you and you have to both keep somebody wet and dry at the same time, how do you do it? The obvious answer is you can't do it in reality. You can't make somebody wet and dry at the same time. It can't happen. So what you need to do is convince them of something that is not true. All right. So this comes to another thing that somebody asked about today, and that is Trump came out today with the idea that he is going to create the External Revenue Service, with which tariffs will bring money into the United States that other people are going to pay. This is bonkers. I mean, literally, tariffs are taxes. They're not literally taxes if I've got an economist listening to me, but that's the way they work. Coming into the United States that are paid by the importer, who then pushes the higher costs in onto consumers. They are not paid by other countries. They're just not. So what is he doing here? Somebody's saying, oh, he really doesn't understand that all right, maybe he doesn't understand. I don't know what the man understands. I will also point out he is not in good health and he is not mentally astute right now, perhaps never again. But he's trying to convince his followers that he is going to do something that doesn't exist. The same way I would argue that the Department of Government Efficiency, which I pronounce doggy, is a real thing. It's not a real thing. Like, you can't just say an agency exists. Agencies have to be created by Congress. And the fact that he's created this thing that is supposed to be a reality when it is not depends on the rest of us all going, oh yeah, that's a thing. And oh yeah, the External Revenue Service is a thing. It's not a thing. So one of the things that we're going to see going forward is, I would argue, I mean, I guess I can't say for reality, is to recognize that Trump is trying to create a false reality that we buy into. But he's running up against the reality, or will run up against the reality, of the fact that the economy already is good and foreign affairs is in a pretty good place too. So he's got to keep that keel even while convincing people he's doing something dramatic. And that going forward is one of the things people like me will be doing, is saying, wait a minute, this is not a thing. I see somebody just said, well, Doggy is hiring people. If it is hiring people, if it's actually getting them to put their names on the line at this point, they're getting paid for by Musk. The government cannot pay them yet. That agency does not exist except in people's minds. And I know they said they were going to hire, but they also said they were going to give people $42 a head for things, and now they're suing over that. They say a lot of things that aren't true, so make sure of whether or not those things are actually true. So what does this look like in reality? So what we have seen is, and somebody asked this question too, I hope I'm pulling all this stuff together. It's kind of a game for me. You know, when you send me all these questions, to see if I can make them into a coherent story, because they're all, what you do when you send me questions is you help me test the waters to see what people are concerned about and what they're really worried about. And then what I try and do is I try and take them and say, okay, this is a snapshot of America in this moment. And I realize that I missed out on one thing I wanted to mention before, but I'll come back to it. So what we have seen, and what I've talked about a lot, is this concept of creating a false reality that people will vote based on. And that's the idea of political technology, which is articulated by Russian political theorists. It's also known as virtual politics. And the idea is that you create a false reality and that people vote based on it. And you are able to do that extraordinarily efficiently through social media in a way that you couldn't before we had social media, although obviously people in the past have done such a thing. People like the propaganda minister under Adolf Hitler did very similarly. But the idea of political technology depends on people being able to see things that are real and sort of understanding them in a different way so that they react to that fake reality. What we're going to see going forward is whether or not Trump is able to sustain that under these conditions. And what is key to being able to do that is to having a compliant media and to having a compliant populace. And that I'm actually gonna take a little bit of a detour here, because it also depends. See, I think I figured out a way to make this work. It also depends on keeping his political party compliant as well. And now I'm going to turn to the Hegseth hearings today, which is a detour that I meant to make earlier, and now I'll do it. And that is, Hegseth is not qualified to be the defense secretary. And what I mean by that when I say it is defense secretaries are the best of the best, even if you don't agree with them. As I often don't even start me on some of these people. They need to know what they're doing. They have background in intelligence. They usually have advanced degrees. They know a number of languages. They know how different countries work, because you want your military to be the last resort. I mean, think about it. Think about the theory of a military. The most important part of a military is making sure you don't have to use it. Because what you really want to do is you want to solve problems with other countries through diplomacy. And that's where our State Department comes in. We don't pay enough attention to how much state does, not only in terms of the stuff you read in the newspapers, but also in terms of making sure we have ties to other countries through things like art exhibits, or through things like sports, or through things like cultural exchanges, or school exchanges, because those create filaments of ties that make it easier for countries to understand each other. And one of the things that a defense secretary does is be the first point of the rub when there are issues that it looks like state can't handle. So one of the reasons that Trump is so angry about the current defense secretary is after the insurrection on January 6th, the Secretary of Defense made calls to, this was Mark Milley, made calls to his counterpart in China to say, back off, we're still a stable country and don't try anything. And that's important because when a country is unstable, it often offers up a whole lots of opportunities for other countries to cause trouble, not necessarily with a direct attack, but with poking at other places and doing things. So you want a defense secretary who is very qualified and who understands the importance of diplomacy, because that saves lives. And it saves lives not only in other countries, it saves lives in the United States as well. That's not Hegseth. Hegseth caught Trump's attention because Hegseth defended men who had committed war crimes. And the military is really strict about that, has a very long history for very good reasons. Just don't even start me. But the fact that Trump stepped in to stop the punishments of people who were not behaving according to military code is a huge deal, because the military needs that. It needs to have its codes. It needs to make sure that it keeps people under a very strict code of ethics, because if you don't have that and you're engaged in the kinds of activities those people are, you destroy not only other people, you destroy your own people. I mean, they hollow out really quickly, both mentally and in terms of their character. And we've had that in our history. Hegseth is not qualified that way. He is not qualified because he's pretty clearly a substance abuse user. He has also run two very small charities into the ground. And he is going to be in charge of overseeing a group of close to 3 million people and a budget of over $800 billion. Again, don't quote me on that because the numbers aren't in front of me. That's not what we want as Secretary of Defense. And the fact that Republicans are defending him is a huge slap in the face to all Americans. So what Trump is banking on with Hegseth is that Republicans are going to roll over and cave on him. And this is where what I just talked about, the media and the American people, are going to come into play. And that's that in this moment, and a number of people have said this, Mark Elias has said this, who does Democracy Docket. A number of people are talking about this. Nobody is going to save the American people going forward except ourselves. And that's a little bit starker than it needs to be today after what happened yesterday. And that's that Jennifer Rubin and Norm Eisen was associated with CNN, Jennifer Rubin was with the Washington Post, began a new independent media to protect democracy. And I hailed that as a really huge moment because a number of us have independently been trying to defend democracy, and a number of us have very large followings. Brian Tyler Cohen on YouTube, for example. I have a large following here on Facebook and on Substack, but Joyce White Vance has one, and Allison Gill of Mueller, She Wrote, and there's a huge group. I'm sorry, the Bulwark, the Dispatch, which are right of center, the I'm sorry, of course, I'm drawing a blank now. I read a lot more than that. But there are a lot of us out there. But what Rubin and Eisen did is they pulled together a huge number of people who have left legacy media outlets as they have turned toward Trump, as the LA Times has done. You know, was a subscriber to the LA Times, but they've turned toward Trump. The Washington Post, same and same. The New York Times has been funny for a long time now, but they have failed us. And the idea now that there is this core of media that is pushing back on the fake world that Trump is creating is really important. It is really important. It was not there in 2017 when he took office. And it's important that you remember that, because I know we're all exhausted and he does not have any guardrails around him this time. But we are also organized in a way that we weren't before this. So I would urge you to follow those people and to support them with money if you can. But what I really mean is by giving eyeballs and brains to what they are talking about, for this reason. When I say that nobody is going to save us, what I mean is that Americans, there are about 330 of us, and some of us are babies and all that, but there's about 330 million of us. That's a lot of people. And what I really noticed during the Biden administration, during the Trump administration, and then during the Biden administration, was that when Trump was in office and then in the first years of the Biden administration, people wrote to me all the time saying, what are they going to do to me? I'm so scared. What's going to happen? What are they going to do to me? And then people stopped saying that. They started talking about what they were going to do, what they cared about, how they were going to change the world. And since Trump has been reelected, I'm seeing a lot more of, I'm scared, what are they going to do to me? And I said to you then, and I will say to you now, this is our swimmy moment. If you don't know that book by Leo Leone, it's a children's book in which a whole bunch of minnows keep getting eaten by a big fish until they recognize that if they all get together, they're bigger than the big fish. And that's what democracy is all about. So when people ask me what they can do, like one of the things that happened today at the Hegseth hearings that just had me floored is, I'm drawing a blank on her name, Senator, Anyway, she asked Hegseth about ASEAN, which is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, which is one of our largest partners. It has more than 600 million people in it. And he didn't know what it was. It is literally the biggest bulwark that the United States has supported against China. It works with the Quad, it works with us, and he didn't know what it was. Now, instead of yelling to me about how mad you are about that, try yelling to your senators. Not only your Democratic senators if you're in a Democratic state, but Republican senators will not take your phone calls because they want to know that you're a constituent. Write them postcards. Make your voices heard. Every day that you're upset about something, do 2 forward-facing things, outward-facing things. Contacting members of Congress, contacting new people who want to rise into the ranks of politics. Certainly pushing back on social media against people who are spreading lies. But our voices, if enough people hear, we don't want Hegseth, they're going to listen. Or better yet, for Republicans, if you support Hegseth, we will make sure we hold you responsible every step of the way. And there are a number, in the Senate, the number of Republicans who are MAGA Republicans is only between 11 and 16. All the rest of those Republicans are convincible. They may not be convinced because they're scared of Trump, but they are convincible. So when I say that nobody is coming to protect us, I mean that we must push back against the lies, and we must push back against the virtual politics and Trump's appointees when they are up for office, and when they try to get people to behave in ways that violate our Constitution and our laws. And that's not going to be easy. There are a lot of people who have their necks on the line for this, but we must, as Benjamin Franklin said, we must, and maybe I'll put that in a piece for the inauguration. We must hang together, or we will. What did he say? We must all hang together, or we will all hang separately. And that's the moment that we're in going forward into this new administration, with the recognition all the time that this is not a juggernaut. This is not even Reagan. This is not the Great Society. This is not Lincoln. This is an administration that keeps claiming a mandate, but in fact is extraordinarily weak. And the other place that you need to focus on is the states. And I wrote about North Carolina recently, but certainly making people in the states aware of what is going on constantly is really important. And there's a lot of people who are out there already supporting independent media or creating independent media. So a friend of mine just put me on to a new magazine. Let's see if I can find it, out of Southwest and South Side Virginia, called Cardinal News. It's all online. It's always very cheap to produce things that are online, because you don't have to worry about now I've totally lost you. You don't have to worry about the cost of production. But if you live in an area that's a news desert that doesn't have stuff going out, think about creating an online newspaper like I do on Substack, and you can make them look much fancier than I do. The new Contrarian that Jen Rubin and Norma Eisen started is on Substack, and it's free. You can do stuff on Facebook if you want to stay here. It's free. So these are the things that we're going to have to be doing going forward, and we have a real infrastructure already there. And one of the things that we will need to do going forward, as I say, is to push back, but also to support each other as we do this. And one of the things that I want to emphasize here, and this has really been clear to me through my email especially, but also comments, people are really angry and they're really scared. And when they do that, they take it out on each other. And I would really urge you to try not to do that. When you're angry and scared about something, write and talk to the people who are making you angry and scared. Because often I find when I say something is happening, people yell at me. Like I just told you about the Smith report. And people are yelling at me about why the Smith report didn't come out earlier. They're angry, I get that. But it doesn't help anybody for you to yell at me. What it does is it makes it harder for me to do my job, because it really does get to you when you get tons of angry emails in a row, especially when they're over something that you really have no control over. So when you get angry, when you get upset, first of all, as I say, find friends so that you're not doing it alone. But second of all, make sure that you turn that anger to where it belongs. One of the things that makes me crazy is when people are upset about what's happening in the government and they go and protest the Democrats, because they know Democrats will listen to them. And that's the same thing that the newspapers said, people like the New York Times said, is there was no point in holding Trump to account because the Republicans didn't care. Whereas if you yelled at the Democrats, they would respond. Well, fine, except what you're really doing is you're weakening the people who are on your side. So when you're upset about something that you think is wrong in the world, yell at the Republicans who are making this happen, and support those who are doing what you want, or at least say nice things to them, because that's how you make things change. And one of the things that makes me, as I say, very frustrated is I know that when the Republicans do something really bad and they need Democratic votes or whatever, people yell at the Democrats. you need to yell at the Republicans who are creating the crisis in the first place, all up and down the scale, from the president all on down to the local people in Tennessee, in North Carolina, in the places that are trying in North Carolina, for example, to steal a Supreme Court seat. Yell about that, complain about that, go to people's offices, always obeying the law. Write letters, make sure people hear that this is not the way you want your democracy to operate. Because in a way, and I'm going to be a Pollyanna here, and people often say to me, how do I have such faith? And the answer is, what are your options? Like, tomorrow's going to come. So you can either hide under the bed and say, I don't want any part of this, just make it go away. It's not going to go away. Trump's not going to stop himself. Or we can work together to support each other to make things get better. And so that's really the position I come from. Am I sanguine about the future? It's looking pretty troubling in a lot of ways. But I do have faith in us. So if you think about the next 4 years, here's what I see. Okay? And I don't know, I'm not going to predict the future. But there is one really big thing, maybe two really big things that have surprised me lately. One is the extraordinary fury poured out over the CEO murder in support of the murderer. The reason that surprises me is because one of the things that Americans have really not talked about since the 1960s is class. We're all over race, we're all over gender, we're all over religion, but we don't talk about the fact the extremely rich Americans have walked away with, as I say, trillions of dollars over that period. And the fact that just exploded the way it did says to me there is room in the next even just year for people who may not coalesce on anything else, to coalesce around the idea that we do not want our democracy stolen by a very few rich people, like the ones who will be sitting next to Trump at his inaugural in a week, or however many days it is. The corollary to that is, for me, the surprise was the fall of Assad in Syria. Because I certainly have been following Ukraine and Russia's war in Ukraine and recognizing that Russia is badly weakened. It is badly weakened, which is one of Biden's great triumphs. That what we thought of at the time he came into office as our greatest geopolitical foe is now so terribly weakened. Russia couldn't save Assad, and now Iran couldn't save Hezbollah and Hamas, and the Houthis are weakened as well. That offers up real possibilities for democracy around the world. And I don't mean necessarily in those countries, but I mean that Russia being as strong as it was, and if you remember, they had he and Putin and Xi had like a we're going to love each other forever pact right before he invaded. That's not what it's officially called. That's just my version of it. Before he invaded Ukraine the second time in 2022, after he invaded in 2014. That looked like that was where the real strength of foreign affairs was going to be. And what they wanted to do was to destroy the international order of all these webs, NATO and CETO and ASEAN and the Quad and the European Union, and did I say NATO? All those. They wanted to tear all those apart and create spheres of influence in which big superpowers, Russia, China, and let me just say Russia, China for now, would control all the countries around them. Now you've got Trump suddenly talking about invading our allies, including Greenland, which is an autonomous region of Denmark, overseen by Denmark. They're our ally. Why on earth would we invade our ally? And similarly with the Panama Canal, and who else is he after? Canada and parts of Mexico. What's he up to? I think he is flirting with the idea that Russia has been trying to push, the idea of getting rid of all these negotiable webs that are designed to prevent world war and replacing them with spheres of influence. And what he will do if he does that is walk away from America's extraordinarily strong influence already around the globe. Say, I don't want Europe. I'm going to give Europe to Russia. Mind you, Europe's not going to go. But that's, I think, the argument. That's certainly Putin's argument. I'm going to give Europe to Russia, and I'm going to take the Americas. Now, that's a terrible idea. I'm just not, usually I don't take a stand. That's a terrible idea. So looking forward here, for all that we have real challenges going forward, we also have the ability to come together to say, we're not happy with the way our democracy has been weighted for the very wealthy. And we don't want the globe to be weighted toward the very wealthy, which is what we're talking about when we're talking about putting oligarchs in charge of spheres of influence, which is what would happen if Russia were in charge. So if we did that, we, meaning you, literally you and me, not our leaders, some of whom are fabulous and not in power, and some of whom are terrible and are in power. But if we pressure our leaders to rework our democracy according to the way it was before we got the partisan gerrymandering, for example, before we got voter suppression, before we got extraordinary money in politics because of today's Supreme Court, we could, in fact, solve a lot of problems. I mean, one of the things about Trump tearing so much down is that they will have to be rebuilt. And the more of us who have our voices in the mix for the rebuilding, the better the chance we have of regaining what are the fundamental principles of American democracy, which is that we all have a right to be treated equally before the law, and we have a right to a say in our government. And those two things that were the ones that the founders of the country in the Declaration of Independence articulated for the first time in modern society, for all that they didn't understand that women were part of that and people of color were part of that and so on, the idea that we are a nation of laws and we have the right to be treated equally before the law, and we have a right to a say in our government, that's what the protesters in Tbilisi, Georgia are in the streets for. That's what people in Gaza are arguing for. That's what people all over the world who are putting their lives on the line are trying to get. And we have the opportunity and the duty, perhaps, and the right to try and protect those things in the United States over the next 4 years. And that's going to take one heck of a lot of work, but I don't see myself that we've got any choice. All right. Thank you for being here. And I'm going to let you go. I will keep you posted on when I'm going to move to YouTube. If people are interested in continuing to watch me on Facebook, despite that move, I will try to stream over here as well. I'm going to be doing a lot of media coming up to the inauguration. And after that, I'm not entirely sure how much media I will do aside from my own and that of my friends, simply because I'm trying to write a new book in addition to the letters. But I will keep you posted. Thank you for being here. We not only can we do this, we have to do it. So I will see you. I'm going to let you know, I'm actually going to do something here with you before the inauguration, because I think people are getting pretty nervous. I will be here. Anyway, I'll talk to you soon. Thank you for being here.